I want to ask you about leaving CNN. You recently, relatively recently, left CNN, and clearly they kind of pushed you out as they announced they were.
I've embraced the F word, Dan. Fired.
You got fired. Why do you think you got fired?
I don't know.
Really? You really don't know?
I really, truly don't know. I think we were doing really fantastic journalism at CNN for the 9 years that I was there.
Fantastic journalism, absolutely. Let's see what Steve has to say about that. Joining me now, Steve Krakauer, editor of Fourth Watch Media and author of the book Uncovered. Hey, Steve, Brian doesn't know why he was fired, man. He was just out there bringing the journalism every single day, and they let him go. I don't know why they would do that to such a man of integrity.
Yeah, I guess if he continued on and said, I don't know why I was fired, and yet Don Lemon and Jim Acosta and Breonna Keeler and so many others have not been, then I can understand where he's coming from, because I do think that in some ways Brian was a bit of a fall guy for the old administration. You know, Brian was most connected to the Jeff Zucker administration, the Jeff Zucker era, which is gone. Now there's new bosses. They've been there for about a year. And Brian is really one of the only notable names who is no longer there. You know, a couple contributors here and there, the John Harwoods of the world. But there's a lot of people from that old era that were, to be honest, not doing good journalism then, not really doing great journalism now, and they remain at CNN. Brian, though, you know, he's there talking to Dan Abrams over on News Nation.
Okay, help me understand why, Steve, because I had heard same things you were hearing when Brian got the axe and before he got the axe, that there was new management now and they're going to clean house and we're going to look at this. We're going to just totally revamp the whole network. And like you pointed out, that loser Don Lemon is still there. He might be one of the dumbest people walking the planet, and he can't quit screwing up, and he still has a show. Why has there not been more turnover?
Yeah, Don Lemon got his butt handed to him by Vivek Ramaswamy this week in what felt like the nail in the coffin to me, although I've said that multiple times, and Don Lemon just remains is like the guy who just cannot lose a job, apparently, although he has been relegated from the primetime area to the morning show that no one's watching, and he's just one of 3 hosts there. So he's been slightly getting demoted, and eventually will be out the door. I'm very confident of that, but not happening yet. Yeah, it's been a year here. I think the cynic in me would say that it is very hard to turn over a news network, and so you've got to do it strategically and slowly, and a couple years down the road we'll say, oh, remember CNN looks completely different now. But no, you're right. As of this moment, it's like the Titanic, and they're literally just rearranging the deck chairs. It's like, oh, let's take this person and pair him with this person. They're the same people. It's not a lot changing there. And so as Donald Trump begins another run, and we know the Donald Trump era was so bad for the journalistic standards of CNN, I don't see it changing massively yet. I hope it does. I really do.
Yeah. Bad for the standards, good for ratings, though. He was interesting because they could not be. You know what else I found interesting was the media's response to the Fox News Dominion suit. Well, here was some of it.
I'm sorry, this is going to be difficult to say with a straight face. This settlement reflects Fox's continued commitment to the highest journalistic standards. We are hopeful that our... Sorry.
I know that there were a lot of people that wanted this process to take place in court because outside the, the media defamation case, this was also a really, to some extent, a trial built about, made about democracy and democracy at large and elections. So, this is going to avert all of that. It's going to save Fox, I think, a lot more added embarrassment.
Steve, call me a nutball, but I can't help but wonder. These people seem to be taking a lot of glee in a news organization being held to account by a private corporation for things they've told on the air, for things they said on the air. The CNN does realize they lie for a living, right, about everyone?
You're absolutely right. And forgive me for a second to just go back. Jake Tapper, solid journalist, not a good actor. That is just embarrassing. And then Oliver Darcy, I completely forgot about him. He's like significantly worse from Brian Stelter as we're going through all the people. He's still there. He's their media guy now. It's just knowing his way through a terrible segment that, clearly someone put together for him about democracy. Like, give me a break. Yeah, no, these people, the CNNs of the world, but beyond that, New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, everyone who's taking glee in what's happening here, this giant $787 million settlement, they do not seem seem to understand the chilling effect that this will have on them. Now, in some cases, it will be just the reverse. So it'll be people on the right who feel that they were smeared correctly. Lies were told about them, will not become much more litigious and will sue them for all sorts of reasons, just like we saw in Nick Sandmann in the Covington High School case, suing places like CNN and coming to a settlement, just like is happening here. Not so much money, we don't know how much money it was settled for. So this is going to continue to happen, and I don't think they clearly understand that this is bad, not just for the Fox Newses of the world, it's bad for them, it's bad for the First Amendment, and their hatred of Fox, their hatred of anything on the right these days, overcomes them with emotion, and they just cannot see the reality of what this will do for their industry.
Buzzfeed News is no longer with us, apparently. I saw that headline today. What do we make of that? I don't think I've ever read Buzzfeed News. Maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, I have to say, I think this is really an interesting moment here. Buzzfeed was one of two outlets, Buzzfeed and Business Insider, that have made it a point that they are now publishing articles using artificial intelligence, AI. Buzzfeed News shuts down today. Insider announces today they're cutting staff by 10%. I don't think these are unrelated. I think that there is a real shift that's happening where if you're a good journalist or, let's say, an interesting commentator, if you've got unique points of view or you're bringing something exclusive to the table, you've got great sources, you should be fine as AI becomes the norm in our society. But if you're a bad journalist, if you're boring, if you bring nothing to this table except aggregation, you will probably lose your job. And I think that's what's happening here with Buzzfeed, Insider, and it's only the beginning. I mean, this is a really perilous time for the bad to marginally good journalists that make up so much of the industry these days, the laziness, they're going to get just completely weeded out.
Steve, this Pentagon leaker story, I don't trust anything anymore, and that's because I've been lied to by all these entities for so long. So I don't trust anything. I don't trust that this was the guy. Maybe he was the guy. I don't know. I just don't trust it. I don't trust that he was working alone. Maybe he was, but I don't know. And that's really the damage that's done when you lose trust in all these institutions. I don't trust the Pentagon. I don't trust the media. I don't trust anyone.
Yeah, I think what's really most interesting to me and makes me not trust the media, the places like the New York Times and the Washington Post that used to really relish when they got a leak. I compared this in Fourth Watch the other day to Politico's exclusive reporting that was thanks to the leak out of the Supreme Court, which was the Dobbs decision. Now, I'm very curious who that Dobbs leaker was, but I get the instinct by the media to keep that silent, to basically go to bat in protecting the leaker, because that's sort of a journalistic tenet. This is the opposite effect. The New York Times and the Washington Post were the keystone cops in trying to track down this person. They're sitting there behind their laptops like these social media sleuths trying to figure out, crack the case. That is completely bizarre because at the bare minimum, we know, thanks to reporting in places like the New York Times, that what was in those leaked documents show that the Biden administration was not being truthful with the American people about what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in South Korea, in Israel. And so we know that there was actual information, actual value that we learned from these leaks. And yet they want to track down the leaker and come up with the identity in conjunction with the FBI. That's a really weird time, and it should raise eyebrows of everybody about where the press is aligned these days.
Well, the system only exists to protect itself. Steve, thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
Hey, Jesse, thanks.